In the 80s and early 90s, Hulk Hogan was the WWF's biggest star. Hogan seemed to transcend the wrestling business as a whole, becoming a household name as he went beyond the normal popularity limitations that were placed on wrestling superstars. Hogan, at one point, arguably became bigger than wrestling itself. But how did Hogan reach these heights? Sure, we all know that Hulk Hogan headlined WrestleMania after WrestleMania during his quest to become the biggest megastar in the history of pro wrestling. But why Hogan? What did Hogan do before the WWF that granted him such superstardom? In this video, we will look into Hulk Hogan before his successful mid-80s tenure with the World Wrestling Federation in hopes of figuring out why Hulk Hogan became the star that he did. Before getting into the nitty-gritty of things here, I feel that I have to point out that the amount of conflicting information out there on Terry Bollea, especially in his early days, is truly staggering. From incorrect dates of early matches that just didn't happen, wrestling news reporters going back on information they once published, even Hulk himself has contradicted things he has said in the past depending on the information source, and that includes Hulk's own book. I've tried my best here to present the most accurate information possible on the early days of Terry Bollea, cross-referencing dates where I could and things like that. There is a possibility that some things have been incorrectly reported, but be aware that I've tried my absolute best to present here the most accurate details regarding Hulk Hogan in the 70s and early 80s. Terry Bollea was born on August 11th, 1953 in Augusta, Georgia. When he was 1 year old, his family moved to Port Tampa in Florida. The young Hulkster was a keen baseball player, pitching in Little League Baseball before an injury put an end to his baseball endeavours. Into his late teens, Hogan began watching professional wrestling, with Dusty Rhodes being his favourite superstar. He would go to the Tampa Sportatorium to see CWF cards while becoming enamoured by these larger-than-life superstars that he saw in the ring. When Hulk Hogan first laid eyes on superstar Billy Graham, he was awestruck, and in Hogan's book, the Hulkster said he wanted to match Graham's inhuman look. Hulk also played the bass guitar growing up, and he would get small bookings around southern Florida. He dropped out of college to try and pursue this dream of playing in a rock band, and in 1976, his band Ruckus became quite well known around the Tampa Bay region. Hogan and lead singer Anthony Crisello had been in a band named Coco before forming Ruckus. Around this time also, Hulk worked out at Hector's Gym in Tampa Bay, working hard to try to get that physique he saw in wrestling shows that the guys like superstar Billy Graham possessed. Jack and Jerry Briscoe visited a bar where Ruckus was playing, and the Briscoe brothers were impressed by the size of Hulk. The Briscoes asked Hogan if he would consider a career in professional wrestling, and of course Hulk was interested. He had been watching wrestling from the Florida region for a long time, and while Hulk was doing fairly well in the Florida music scene, a career in wrestling could be much more lucrative, and of course, it opened the doors to fame and everything that comes along with it. The Briscoes talked Hiro Matsuda into training Hogan. The Hulkster would quit Ruckus, and for a year, Hogan went through one of wrestling's most difficult training regimes. Hiro Matsuda's school was no walk in the park. There's a long-running story out there that Hiro Matsuda broke Hulk Hogan's leg on the first day of training, and to be honest, I wouldn't want to present that as an absolute fact. Jerry Briscoe said that it was a sprained ankle that Hogan trained on, eventually leading to a broken ankle. Hogan too, with all due respect, can embellish the truth on occasion, and wrestling myths like this seem to get more embellished as time goes on. It's certainly possible that it did happen, but Hogan has peers out there who have debunked the myth, so that's that out of the way. While Hogan was still training, Jack Briscoe paid a visit to one of Hiro's classes. where he told Hulk Hogan that he was scheduled to work a match 1 week later. It's been stated online and in interviews also that Hogan's first match was against Brian Blair in the CWF, but it wasn't. Hogan's first match was against Don Serrano for the CWF in John Carroll High School. The match took place on the 9th of August 1977. Brian Blair did give Hogan his first training match, but not his first professional wrestling match in front of a live audience. Hogan worked against Brian Blair 3 days after the Don Serrano match, also in front of paid customers. Hulk during this time in his career was known as the Super Destroyer. The Super Destroyer gimmick was one that was passed on to other superstars in the years that followed. So for example, Sergeant Slaughter was once the Super Destroyer Mark II in the AWA. Hogan wasn't the first Super Destroyer either, by the way. Canadian wrestler Don Jardine, who would go on to become the Spoiler, was the first to use the Super Destroyer name. Hogan used the gimmick during his time in Florida and gave up on the character when his time was up in the territory. By the end of his run here, he was already done with professional wrestling. Hulk felt that he could no longer continue on with Hiro Matsuda's demanding training regime, and perhaps getting into wrestling was a giant mistake on his part. Hulk worked his final CWF match in October of 1977 and didn't step back into a wrestling ring for around a year and a half. During this time, he began managing a private club in Cocoa Beach, Florida, and he also co-owned a gym. It seemed that Hogan's days in the ring were over before they really began. Enter Ed Leslie, Mr. Bootyman Brutus Beefcake himself. Leslie and Hogan were friends, and during this time period, Leslie began helping Hulk Hogan run his gym. Hogan and Beefcake would work out together, and over time, Beefcake's physique got so good that Hogan felt the pair could be a tag team in wrestling. I'm not joking, by the way, or maybe I am telling you guys an embellishment here. This is how the story went according to Hulk's book, and to be honest, us fans have no other real information in regards to Hogan's downtime here, so yeah, let's just run with it. Ed Leslie's physique saved the career of the Hulkster. Anyway, Hogan had decided to lace up the boots once again, and he would bring Ed Leslie with him for the journey, promising to get Ed's foot in the door and teach him everything he knows from his stint in the CWF and beyond. It was actually Billy Graham who got Hogan some work outside of Florida. The Hulkster was on his way to Alabama to begin working as Terry Boulder. Ed Leslie would be known as Ed Boulder, and together we had the Boulder Brothers. Before getting to Alabama and Southeast Championship Wrestling, Terry Boulder had a quick stop in Memphis where he teamed up with Jerry Lawler for 2 matches. Lawler and Boulder won both matches. Remarkably, Terry Boulder's very first match in Southeast Championship Wrestling was an NWA World Heavyweight title shot against Harley Race, a match that Hogan lost, but still, it's very noteworthy here that Hogan was given a shot at the NWA Championship in his first match in the territory. Likewise, his final 2 matches in the territory were also NWA Championship matches against Harley Race, winning both of these matches by disqualification. Hogan only spent around 2 months in Southeast, but he had a great win record here. Immediately following his time in Alabama, Hogan went back to Memphis on the promise of a much higher paycheck on a weekly basis. His first lot of matches here saw him team up with Ed Leslie as the duo got some early victories as the Boulder Brothers. It was also during this time in Memphis that Hulk Hogan got his Hulk name, thanks to appearing on a Memphis talk show where he sat beside Lou Ferrigno, the man who played the Incredible Hulk in the early TV shows, and the host of this talk show commented that Hogan was actually bigger than the Incredible Hulk. Back in the CWA, Terry Boulder then became Terry the Hulk Boulder. Terry Boulder remained in Memphis for only around 3 months, but the amount of matches Hogan got here in such a short period of time was really good. The Boulder Brothers then packed their bags to move into the next territory, Georgia Championship Wrestling, and a new territory meant a new name for the Hulkster and the Beefcake. Hogan became Sterling Golden, and Ed, he became Dizzy Golden. Don't ask. A notable and fun little fact here is that on the 20th of November in 1979, Sterling Golden got a victory over Bret Hart while in the Georgia territory, Hogan here being one of Bret's earliest opponents in the United States. Terry Funk has been credited as the man who introduced Vince McMahon Sr. to Hulk Hogan, and it's been said that Vince Sr. was very impressed by Hogan's physique, which by this point was way bigger than when he started back in Florida. It's been said also that Vince Sr. gave Hulk the name Hulk Hogan as he wanted Hulk to use an Irish name. This is likely true, but just for the record, I'm from Northern Ireland and I don't know a single person with the surname Hogan, or the first name Hogan for that matter, but anyway, Hogan got 3 consecutive wins in Pennsylvania while working under the WWF banner here. It seems that Vince Sr. was giving Hulk a tryout at first to see how well he would do. Hulk then went back to Georgia and worked as Sterling Golden once again, finishing up his commitments before starting with Vince McMahon Sr. and the WWF on a full-time basis. Hogan had his first match in Madison Square Garden on the 17th of December, defeating Ted DiBiase in the process. Hogan's first WWF stint lasted around a year. He was a bad guy, and with manager Classy Freddie Blassie by his side, he worked against the likes of Tito Santana, Gorilla Monsoon and Jose Estrada while scoring win after win. Hogan also feuded with a babyface Andre the Giant, a notable match occurring between the two in August of 1980 at Shea Stadium. During this time also, Hogan split his time between the WWF and New Japan Pro Wrestling, going over to Japan to take on people like Antonio Inoki and Tatsumi Fujinami, while also tagging with Stan Hansen here in the tag leagues. Hogan would tour again with New Japan in May of 1981, and one of the more interesting matches happened on May 25th. On this date, Dusty Rhodes defeated Hulk Hogan via countout. Hogan would once again return to New Japan and have great success, but more on that later. Just to backtrack a little, Hulk's last matches with the WWF during this stint occurred in April of 1981. Hogan lost to Tony Atlas on the 18th, and about a week prior, Hogan lost a Texas death match to Andre the Giant. Hogan was then fired from the WWF due to his participation in the Rocky III movie. Hogan played the role of Thunderlips in the movie, something he felt would elevate his stock while also securing him a nice payday. Vince Sr., however, did not want Hogan to act in the movie. Hulk Hogan said the following on the Steve Austin podcast. The mindset back then wasn't like it is now. Like, we want Stone Cold to do his TV show, and we want Stone Cold to do the Expendables, and we want The Rock to do whatever. Back then, if you were a wrestler, you didn't do TV. You didn't go do a movie. If you were a wrestler, you were a wrestler. Vince Sr. fired me for doing the movie because you weren't supposed to do movies or TV shows back then. So Hulk was out of a job, but really not for long. He briefly went back to Florida for a few weeks, winning every match he was booked in before joining Vern Gagne's AWA with Eddie Boulder by his side. I'd say that it was here in the AWA where Hogan truly became a star in the wrestling world, as much as Vern Gagne tried to stop it from happening. Vern liked pure pro wrestling, and he liked wrestlers who had great athletic pedigree, and this just really wasn't Hulk Hogan. Hogan was more about the showmanship, playing up to the crowd, big impact moves, that kind of thing. The thing was, the majority of the AWA's top stars were getting older, and here was Hulk Hogan, a name in New York, a younger guy who was making a name for himself also in movies and whatnot. You'd think that Vern would at least consider building the AWA around a young, upcoming star, but no, Vern Gagne was incredibly stubborn back then, much to his detriment. Hogan was initially booked as a bad guy in the AWA, but as the weeks went on, more fans would cheer for him. Hogan's babyface turn eventually happened in the summer of 1981. Rocky III was released in theatres the following year, and Hogan's popularity, within the wrestling world at least, exploded. Hogan was feuding with the Heenan family and AWA champion Nick Bockwinkel, and Vern had a golden opportunity to grab that crossover media attention that promoters dream of. but yet he was still hesitant to go all the way with Hogan and give him the AWA Championship. Hogan vs Bockwinkel done big business. It sold out arenas across the Midwest as people clamoured to see Hogan win the title. It was teased. He won the AWA title on 2 occasions, but the decisions were reversed both times. But in all the missed opportunities within the history of wrestling, this one here by Verne Gagne has to rank up there as one of the all-time greats. There's rumours out there that Verne would only give Hogan the belt if Hulk agreed to give him a cut of Hulk's Japanese touring money, but this can't be confirmed nor denied. Hulk said that he had to print his own t-shirts and merchandise because the AWA done a poor job of marketing their wrestlers. When Hogan got back after another tour of Japan, he learned that Verne was now printing and selling his own Hulk Hogan t-shirts. Verne apparently refused to give Hogan a cut on merchandise sales, something that infuriated Hogan, and really, this was the straw that broke the camel's back. Hogan also said on the same day this argument went down that both he and Verne got into a scuffle, and this pretty much ended the Hulk Hogan and the AWA relationship. While it does all sound like doom and gloom here, Hogan's time in the AWA was insanely important to the man's rise in popularity. While Hogan didn't win the AWA Championship, at least not officially, he did make people tune into AWA shows, he sold out arenas, and he became one of the hottest acts in wrestling. So we should also mention here that in 1983, while Hogan was still with the AWA, the Hulkster became the first IWGP tournament winner and the first holder of an early version of the IWGP Heavyweight Championship. In the tournament finals, he defeated the legendary Antonio Inoki to win the belt. Keep in mind, this isn't the same IWGP Heavyweight Championship that is defended today, but still, a nice feather in Hogan's cap here, and a great example of how over he was in Japan. In 1982 and 1983, Hulk Hogan and Antonio Inoki were partners in the MSG Tag League that took place in Japan, going on to win the match series 2 times in a row. So that's pretty much it then. After the falling out with Verne Gagne in November of 1983, Hogan went to Japan for a few weeks before coming back to the United States in December of 93. By this time, the WWF was under the control of Vince McMahon Jr., a man who saw great potential in Hulk Hogan. While Vince Sr. was more old school and traditional with wrestling as a whole, Vince Jr. simply was not as traditional. Vince Jr. didn't believe in unwritten rules in wrestling. He had a relentless desire to turn the WWF from a regional promotion to a national and worldwide powerhouse, and he saw the marketability within Hulk Hogan. Vince McMahon Jr. saw Hulk Hogan as the WWF's leading attraction, the face of not only his company, but the face of American professional wrestling. Hulk came back to the WWF, and 4 matches later, he was the WWF World Heavyweight Champion. Hogan's successful WWF run and the rise of Hulkamania, though, will be covered in a future video. In the last Wrestling Bios video looking at the career of Hulk Hogan, we left off just as Hogan had returned to the WWF in 1983. Hogan's time in the AWA was extremely important when discussing the man's rise in pro wrestling. It really can't be argued that it was in the AWA where Hogan really became a huge fan favourite, but his upcoming WWF stint here in 1983 would turn Hulk Hogan from a superstar into a worldwide megastar. Vince McMahon had purchased the WWF from his father the year prior, having grand ideas to expand the New York territory into a nationwide juggernaut, and Vince McMahon had selected Hulk Hogan to lead the charge in this monumental task. Hogan would be the face of the company, the big babyface star, the American hero, with Vince feeling like Hulk Hogan could very well be the man that helps make the WWF a powerhouse in American wrestling. Of course, we all know that Vince McMahon was purchasing top talent from every territory across America in order to not only become the #1 wrestling organisation in the country, but to also hurt those same territories that, ironically enough, his father had great relationships with. But out of all of this top talent that Vince McMahon had taken from every major promotion in America, it speaks volumes still that Hulk Hogan was selected as the company golden boy. Like it or not, Hogan would be the man in the World Wrestling Federation, and the success he had in his new role here cannot be questioned. Hulk Hogan's first match back in the WWF was on the 27th of December 1983 against Bill Dixon at the Chase Park Plaza Hotel in Missouri. This match has survived, it's available online and you can watch it right now with a quick Google search. Don't worry about the confused dates, the match aired on the 1st of January the following year. Hogan was introduced as the Incredible Hulk Hogan, playing off the Incredible Hulk Marvel Comics here. Just to get it out of the way also, Marvel Comics would end up obtaining the trademarks for the names Hulk Hogan, the Hulkster and Hulkamania, and Titan Sports had to agree to remove the Incredible name tag away from Hogan. Marvel would also receive a 0.9% cut of Hogan's merchandise sales along with a cash payment every time Hulk Hogan worked a match. This was around $100. This agreement was in place for 20 years, so you can imagine how much money Marvel made from the Hulk Hogan name during this time period. Anyway, Hogan comes to the ring here with Eye of the Tiger playing in Chase Park Plaza, and the fans love him here. His association with Freddie Blassie during his previous stint had all been forgiven. Hogan hits the leg drop, the crowd goes nuts, and Hogan wins his return match. Exactly one day before Hulk Hogan had his return match, Bob Backlund dropped the WWF Championship to the Iron Sheik. Hindsight being 2020, we can see here that Sheik was holding on to the title in order to drop it to the Hulkster in a future match. Bob Backlund, in Vince McMahon's eyes, was yesterday's news at this point. It was all about getting the strap on Hogan, and it happened in record time. Hogan had 2 more matches in the WWF here before meeting Sheik in Madison Square Garden on the 23rd of January 1984. The first match was a tag team showdown featuring Hulk Hogan teaming up with former champion Bob Backlund to take on Mr. Fuji and Tiger Chung Lee. The babyfaces got the win here, and the second match was against Gilbert Guerrero. Hogan won this match in around a minute. The next match then would be Hulk Hogan versus the Iron Sheik in Madison Square Garden. The day Hulkamania was born, and the business of professional wrestling would be changed forever. There's a legendary story here in regards to Iron Sheik being offered money to break Hulk Hogan's leg in the middle of the ring on this very night. The thing is, it appears to be a true story. Many people, including Hulk Hogan, the Iron Sheik, producers and workers, have told the story over and over again, and there has never been a debunking of the tale, so I'm going to say that this did really happen. Vern Gagne apparently offered Iron Sheik $100,000 to legitimately hurt Hogan in the ring. Remember, Vern and Hogan had a bad relationship towards the end of Hulk's AWA run, so the motive here was to stop Hogan from becoming this huge WWF megastar by having his leg broke. It's been reported that Sheik approached Vince McMahon before the match and told Vince about the offer. However, Sheik also told Vince that he had no problems putting Hogan over because of how good the WWF had been to the Sheik until that point. Vince, when approached by Sheik, wasn't sure if he was being held up for more money, but Sheik was simply letting Vince know about the offer and confirming to Vince that he was not going to hurt Hulk Hogan in the ring. I know Sheik is absolute comedy gold these days, and his eccentrics are of the highest quality imaginable, but back then he was all about the business. Iron Sheik said, "Well, I didn't mind because I have a lot of respect for Mr. McMahon and his family, and whatever he told me, I did it for them because Mr. McMahon is the #1 promoter in the world." In regards to being offered money to hurt Hulk Hogan, Sheik said, "That's legit because over there at that time, Hulk Hogan was in Minnesota, and from Minnesota he came through to New York, and Mr. Vern Gagne, one night before, he called me and told me, 'Don't drop the belt to Hogan, come back to Minnesota, I will take care of you and give you $100,000. Hogan didn't know about this cash offer to break his leg when he went into the ring to win the WWF Championship for the very first time, but the match itself went off without a hitch. And you better believe that if Bob Backlund was on the opposing side of the ring, then the ovation may not have been so one-sided. Bob Backlund still had fans in New York during this time, so give Iron Sheik credit here, he was the perfect villain to go against the American-made Hulk Hogan. The storyline going in here and Hogan's abrupt push to the main event was explained as Hogan being a last-minute replacement for Bob Backlund in this match. Hulk got the win with the big leg drop, and the reaction from the audience was second to none. It's a moment in wrestling history here for sure. Gorilla Monsoon famously says on the headset that Hulkamania is here, and the dominating run of Hulk Hogan at the top of the wrestling mountain had only just begun. Andre the Giant celebrated with Hulk Hogan backstage after the match, a man who would play an important role soon when talking about the history of Hulk Hogan in the World Wrestling Federation. Immediately after winning the WWF Championship, Hulk Hogan went back to Japan for just over a week to take part in an NJPW tour. Interesting about this time period here is that Hulk Hogan teamed up with Bret Hart on the 6th of February 1982 in a losing effort, but still interesting stuff. When Hogan returned to America, the Rockets were strapped to his back with a series of successful title defenses against the likes of David Schultz, Greg Valentine, Paul Orndorff and the Iron Sheik. Hogan would continue to split his time between New Japan and the WWF for much of the first half of 1984, finishing the year off with title defences against Roddy Piper and Big John Studd, just to name a few. Every match followed the same routine. Hogan would get some offense in, but his opponent would begin destroying him. When his opponent had a finisher, Hogan would spring back to his feet, hulk up and put his opponent away with the big leg drop. This routine, as mundane as one may find it today, worked absolute wonders. Fans could not get enough of Hogan's heroic comebacks. On the mic, Hogan began referring to his fans as Hulkamaniacs, encouraging fans to train hard, eat their vitamins and say their prayers. It all fell into place wonderfully for Terry Bollea and the World Wrestling Federation. This was their winning formula. The planets also aligned for Hulk Hogan in 1984 thanks to wrestling becoming part of mainstream pop culture, owing a lot of this to the rock and wrestling connection. In 1983, Captain Lou Albano had met with singer Cyndi Lauper on a trip to Puerto Rico, and this trip resulted in Lauper asking the Captain to appear in her music video for the single Girls Just Want to Have Fun. Vince McMahon would go on to book Captain Lou and Cyndi Lauper into a Piper's Pit segment on WWF TV, and this coupling of music and wrestling really began to blossom. MTV then would have wrestling shows on their channel, even broadcasting the very first live wrestling match on cable television. The Brawl to End It All and later The War to Settle the Score were both successful WWF shows that aired on MTV, and this partnership only helped the WWF and Hulk Hogan become more prominent to audiences of entertainment in general, not just your typical pro wrestling fans. Mainstream attention was what Vince McMahon sorely craved during this time period. It's what would ultimately set him apart from his competition, much to the dismay of wrestling traditionalists at the time. The AWA had Super Sunday and soon they would have their Super Clash shows, the NWA had Starrcade, and World Class Championship Wrestling had their Star Wars shows. All of these were considered the biggest yearly events of their respective companies' calendars. Vince McMahon then would present WrestleMania to the world, held in Madison Square Garden on the 31st of March 1985 and broadcasted to over 130 closed-circuit networks. MTV's popularity and coverage of wrestling with the Wendy Richter and Cyndi Lauper partnership had generated a huge amount of interest in the World Wrestling Federation's programming at this time, so the concept of WrestleMania was to mix the world of wrestling with the world of celebrity and entertainment on this extravagant super show. Dubbed the Super Bowl of professional wrestling, Vince McMahon gambled a great deal by presenting WrestleMania, and he needed it to work. Hulk Hogan headlined the show, tagging up with his friend Mr. T to take on Paul Orndorff and Roddy Piper, and before the show, a ton of media work was done by Hulk Hogan and Mr. T, which put the guys on TV a lot more. Famously, on March 20th, 1985, just 11 days before WrestleMania, Hogan and Mr. T appeared on the Hot Properties talk show, where Hogan applied a guillotine choke to host Richard Bezler, who in fairness had been making light of wrestling and the dramatics surrounding a wrestling match. The chokehold completely knocked out Richard Bezler. He fell to the ground, cracked his head, and had to go to hospital. But anyway, Hogan and Mr. T won at the inaugural WrestleMania. The event was a massive success, which done nothing but further elevate the WWF as a force in the world of entertainment, along with further elevating Hulk Hogan as the #1 wrestling attraction in the world. It was nothing but win after win for Hulk Hogan immediately following WrestleMania 1, taking on the likes of Bob Orton, Jesse Ventura and Paul Orndorff, as the world just couldn't get enough of Hulk Hogan. May 11th, 1985 saw the TV debut of Saturday Night's Main Event, airing on NBC and drawing a staggering 8.8 rating. This show featured Hulk Hogan with Mr. T in his corner, taking on Cowboy Bob Orton with Roddy Piper in his corner. Hogan picked up a DQ win here, and the WWF picked up a huge television rating. Saturday Night's Main Event 2, held on October 3rd but airing on October 5th, saw Hulk Hogan defeat Nikolai Volkov in a flag match, again scoring another massive NBC TV rating with an 8.3. The biggest Saturday Night's Main Event rating though happened on the January 4th, 1986 episode. A 10.4 rating was earned on a show that featured Hulk Hogan defeating Terry Funk. The later half of 1985 also saw Hulk Hogan get his very own Saturday morning cartoon, Hulk Hogan's Rockin' Wrestling, and this is just another example of how Hulk Hogan and the WWF had crossed over into the mainstream. The beginning of 1986 followed the same formula as 1985, Hogan destroying heels on a regular basis. It didn't let up at all. There was no stopping Hulkamania. Night after night, sellout after sellout, Hulk Hogan became a megastar. Vince McMahon's plans to use Hulk as the face of the company had worked wonders, and while many fans still preferred the NWA style of grittier and, dare I say, more realistic wrestling, the mainstream audience, the casual fans, children, grandparents, they all loved Hulk Hogan and they all loved watching the WWF. Vince McMahon decided his dominant wrestling company could host WrestleMania II in 3 different cities across America in one night, attempting to top the NWA Starrcade 85 being held in 2 cities in the process, and Hulk Hogan headlined the whole thing by taking on King Kong Bundy inside a steel cage at the Los Angeles portion of the show. Hogan, of course, won the match, and it again followed the same Hogan match formula that fans were accustomed to over the past year or so, but still, the audience in LA went nuts for the outcome. WrestleMania 2, as a wrestling show in itself, wasn't all that great in my opinion, but you can learn more about that in my WrestleMania 2 video. The WrestleMania 3 match featuring Hulk Hogan vs Andre the Giant was the first truly epic main event match in WrestleMania history. Held at the Pontiac Silverdome in Detroit on March 29th, 1987, the irresistible force meeting the immovable object would become a moment in wrestling lore that would live forever. Hogan body slamming Andre the Giant is one of those defining images in wrestling. Everyone has saw it, and due to its inclusion in WWE's opening signatures for shows, wrestling fans have probably saw it thousands of times without even realising it. So our look at the entire career of Hulk Hogan stops off today at WrestleMania 3 as we look into one of the most pivotal matches in the history of professional wrestling. So in the last Hulk Hogan video uploaded to the channel, we learned about the Hulkster's rise in not only wrestling but pop culture itself. Vince McMahon had hand-selected Hogan as the face of his company as the WWF began a national and eventual worldwide expansion. Hulk was going to pretty much be the poster boy for the company. Portraying an American hero who would tell us to train hard, eat our vitamins and say our prayers, Hulk was booked as the unbeatable hero world champion, the shining star of the company. Fans ate it up too. Viewers of the World Wrestling Federation during this time couldn't get enough Hulk Hogan, while some of the more traditional fans of the NWA scoffed at Vince McMahon and the Hulk Hogan push. You can't argue with the results though. The WWF became very popular with casual fans, young and old, and Hogan played an insanely huge part in making it all work. The WrestleMania project of 1985 had paid off. The sequel ended up getting 3 separate venues, and the third would be held in front of a record audience never seen before in the United States. Hulk Hogan, of course, would be in the main event. Andre the Giant made his WWF debut in 1973 as a babyface, eventually becoming known as the 8th Wonder of the World. It was frequently said on headsets and in WWF publications that Andre was undefeated during the entirety of his career, right up until 1987 anyway. This is incorrect. Andre had never been pinned or submitted in a WWF ring. He had been counted out and disqualified, and outside the World Wrestling Federation, he had taken losses in Mexico and Japan. Those who watched my previous Hogan videos also would know that Andre had already had matches with Hulk where Hogan was the heel and Andre was the fan favourite. Hogan had even body slammed Andre during these earlier matches too. But as with most things when it comes to WWE booking, why let the facts ruin a good story? Hogan and Andre had also worked against each other in Japan where the roles were reversed again. Hogan is the babyface and Andre is the heel, so these two were no strangers to each other. Prior to the WrestleMania III build-up, Hogan and Andre had been booked as allies. Andre even celebrated with the Hulkster when Hogan won the WWF Championship for the very first time. What you have to remember though is that Andre the Giant was a true attraction. In the era before cable TV, the first time people saw a man of this size was when they first laid eyes on Andre. He truly was an extraordinary real-life giant. When you have an attraction like Andre the Giant and a real-life superhero like Hulk Hogan, you best believe that their on-screen friendship would take a bad turn in order to sell tickets. Wrestling 101. Andre took some time off after WrestleMania II to try and heal his back, among other things. Andre's spine had been narrowing and he was having difficulties not only wrestling, but even walking and going about his every day-to-day life. He went to England to film the Princess Bride movie, but back in the world of wrestling, Bobby Heenan would claim that Andre was actually afraid of King Kong Bundy and Big John Studd, hence his absence from the ring. Heenan laid out challenges for Andre and Andre wouldn't show up, leading to a kayfabe suspension of the Giant from WWF President Jack Tunney. In the summer of 1986, however, Andre the Giant made his return as the Masked Giant Machine, working as part of the Machine stable that also included Big Machine, played by Blackjack Mulligan, and Super Machine, played by Bill Eadie, better known as Demolition Axe. The Machines, in storyline, had come from Japan to wrestle in the WWF, with their masks taking inspiration, or rather directly copying, from New Japan's Super Strong Machine character. It was extremely obvious that it was Andre after all, but Heenan could never prove it. At one point, Hulk Hogan and Roddy Piper were also members of the Machines, with both men making one-time appearances as Hulk Machine and Piper Machine. Hulk needed to work on his incognito skills though. In late 1986, the Giant Machine disappeared and Andre the Giant was magically reinstated. On the January 17, 1987 episode of Superstars, Hulk Hogan was presented with a trophy for holding the WWF Championship for 3 years. Andre the Giant, Hogan's friend, came out and said 3 years is a long time to be champion, giving the Hulkster a very firm handshake that caught the Hulkster by surprise. The next week, Andre was also honoured for his undefeated streak, however his trophy was much smaller. Hulk Hogan came out to give props to Andre, but the Giant walked off stage in the middle of the promo. Hogan had come across here as trying to steal Andre's spotlight. To figure out what was going on here, an interview was scheduled between the two men on February 7th, 1987, again in Piper's Pit. This segment here would also become famous in its own right, the day when Andre turned heel and challenged Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan was introduced first here, but the big shock came when Andre the Giant came out with Bobby Heenan by his side, made more shocking when you consider how long Heenan and Andre had been feuding with each other. Hogan pleaded with Andre not to associate himself with Bobby Heenan, reminding the Giant about all the things he had done to both Andre and Hogan in the past. Heenan spoke on behalf of Andre, saying that Andre is sick and tired of Hulk Hogan and everything he stands for. Heenan said that Hogan had used Andre during his title reign, and he only befriended Andre to ensure that the Giant wouldn't challenge him for the WWF title. This was really good stuff here, especially for this time period. Hogan's previous big feuds didn't have so much emotion attached to them, so this story here of a broken down friendship really helped to make more of their inevitable showdown. Putting Bobby Heenan with Andre was extremely smart too. Heenan could talk for days and he had the ability to get stories across in an entertaining and believable way. As a heel manager, this segment here was some of Heenan's finest work. I don't care what anyone says either, Hulk Hogan does deserve credit here too. He played the part perfectly, frantically pleading with Andre, not wanting to believe that this was true, visibly shaking on camera. Yes, it's cheesy today, but put yourself back in that time frame, being a little Hulkamaniac and all that. You would have felt like the world had come crashing down here because Hogan couldn't get through to his former best friend. The segment ended in dramatic fashion too. Andre said he was coming for Hogan's championship at WrestleMania, and he tore the shirt off Hogan's back. Andre, however, also caught Hogan's necklace, breaking it from his neck, and the crucifix attached to the necklace must have caught Hogan's chest as the Hulkster started bleeding. Taking immediate advantage of the situation here, Roddy Piper told Hogan that he was bleeding as the Hulkster fell to his knees in despair. Hogan revealed that he put some Vicks Vapor Rub on his finger before coming out, and as Andre rips the shirt, he tries to put the Vapor Rub under his eyes to force tears to stream from his face, and you can actually see this when you slow the footage down, so this is some good stuff here. An incredibly good segment, the first really engrossing promo leading into a WrestleMania main event. The WWF hit a genuine home run here. Never had Hulk Hogan appeared so vulnerable. So Andre had sold his soul to Bobby Heenan in order to become WWF champion, a huge deal here in the world of wrestling. Andre had never gone after the championship in New York, at least on TV, and this makes sense because he just didn't need it. He sold tickets without needing a championship belt. Andre had always explained this on TV as being happy with being the Giant and not being the WWF champion. Hogan went back on Piper's Pit and confirmed he would face Andre at WrestleMania, and a contract signing aired on TV which only further built on the story. Hogan told Andre that if he wanted a title shot so badly, all he had to do was ask. Andre said he may have taught Hogan a few things in wrestling, but he didn't teach him everything, and he will leave WrestleMania as the world champion. The Pontiac Silverdome was one of the largest stadiums in the world with a capacity of nearly 100,000 people. Vince McMahon felt that Hulk Hogan vs Andre the Giant could sell out this gigantic stadium, and you really have to appreciate the risk factor here in booking this venue. Remember, this was 1987. Vince McMahon was betting on the popularity of Hulk Hogan, the attraction of Andre the Giant, and the broken friendship storyline to make people buy tickets. Of course, there were other matches that would entice fans to the Silverdome. No one can forget Steamboat vs Savage, even Harley Race vs the Junkyard Dog, and also the rise of the WWF's tag team division at the time. But Andre vs Hulk was the marquee match here. If WrestleMania III didn't move tickets, then the storyline and drawing power of Hulk vs Andre would have been deemed a failure. A week after tickets went on sale, the WWF announced on TV that it looks like a new attendance record would be set at WrestleMania. The build-up and the storyline had paid off as Vince McMahon saw ticket sales go up and up on a daily basis. WrestleMania 3 would be at nearly full capacity. During WrestleMania, the WWF announced an attendance of 93,173, a number that's been disputed due to the company's habits of inflating numbers. But don't get all Dave Meltzer over it. Look at that audience. For a 1987 wrestling show in America, it really is a breathtaking sight. Let's not forget about pay-per-view numbers too. If Hogan and Andre were selling out the Pontiac Silverdome, then fans across America would also be tuning in via pay-per-view in record numbers. John Cena summed it up well when he said, "Everybody had to see it and everybody could see it, which was really cool." When WrestleMania 3 aired, the Cena household became the Pontiac Silverdome. 50 people came over to the house. Aunts, uncles and cousins I never even knew existed came over that day to watch WrestleMania. It was that captivating. Let's look at the match then, but do stick around because there are other things that need discussed here. Andre and Heenan made their way to the ring while garbage was getting thrown at them. Gorilla Monsoon says on commentary that Andre had been brainwashed by Bobby Heenan, while Jesse Ventura reminds Monsoon that Andre has been overlooked for years and he deserves this title opportunity. Hogan makes his way to the ring as Real American plays in the background. He panders to the audience. Then the two men lock eyes as the theme music dies down. Hogan and Andre approach each other, and Gorilla Monsoon gives us the iconic line, "The irresistible force meeting the immovable object." Can you recall a commentary line in the last 10 years that would become as iconic as this? The two stare down a little longer before Andre makes the first move, pushing Hogan away. Hogan retaliates with a series of punches and man, the crowd explodes here at Hogan's offense. Hulk quickly tries to body slam Andre, but he is unable to. Andre falls on Hogan and pins the Hulkster, and Andre thought he won the match. He thought it was a 3 count here, but only 2. Andre then begins laying in giant clubbing blows to Hogan, each one knocking Hogan to the mat. Andre then drives Hogan to the mat with a big body slam, and things are already looking bad here for the Hulkster. Jesse Ventura realizes on the headset that this WrestleMania main event is a mismatch. Hogan hasn't got a chance. The noise from the audience cannot be overstated. They try to rally behind Hogan as he takes a slow and calculated beating from Andre. Hogan manages to escape an attack from Andre in the corner, and the crowd again goes into overdrive at Hulk's flurry of offense, but Andre stops the Hulkster with a big boot, silencing the audience in the process. Andre locks in a bear hug. Gorilla Monsoon says he would be surprised if Hogan submits, while Jesse says he may not have a choice. Hogan seems to fade away, but he fights out with punches. The Hulkster again tries to mount an attack on Andre, but Andre stops Hogan in his tracks. The match then spills to the outside, and after Andre headbutts the ring post, Hogan exposes the concrete floor, resulting in Hulk himself taking a comically bad looking back body drop on the outside. Back in the ring, Hogan is able to take Andre off his feet with a clothesline, and again, the Pontiac Silverdome becomes deafening. Hulk stands up, delivers a body slam to Andre, nails the leg drop, and it's all over. The body slam too has become iconic. The flashing camera bulbs and the crowd noise make it such a great moment in wrestling history that deserves to get replayed as much as it does. You need to watch this with the sound on. It's one thing seeing the clip of Andre getting slammed, but when you take in the full match in this moment right here, it could truly give you goosebumps. Hogan wins. He celebrates in the ring as Heenan and Andre make their way back up the ramp. There's a real party atmosphere here to end WrestleMania 3. Okay, there's a few elephants in the room that need addressed. The first will be quick. Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer likes to share his opinions on wrestling with an imaginary star rating he makes up in his head, and people seem to take his word as gospel. Meltzer gave this match -4 stars, and after some consideration, he changed the rating to -3 stars. I had scripted a paragraph here regarding this being Andre's last big match when he knew he had limited time left on this earth, how no one should have expected a technical masterpiece, how the passing of time has made this match just as important as WrestleMania itself, and in the end, I think it's just best to leave Meltzer's rating standing there and let you make up your own mind. I ask you though, before you say this match was boring, slow, predictable, go back and watch it from start to end in 2020 and see how you feel after the match. Remember, keep the sound on and just get lost in the match. I'll just say that I personally feel Meltzer was way off the mark here, and I know people buy his newsletter and the guy is knowledgeable, much more than you or I, but don't let a journalist tell you what is right and wrong about a wrestling match. Make up your own mind based on how much enjoyment you get out of seeing a match unfold. The second thing we need to talk about then is the story that Andre the Giant was considering not allowing Hogan to win on this night. It's been said that Hogan didn't know if Andre was going to do the job at WrestleMania 3. The Hulkster was apparently afraid that Andre would take matters into his own hands in this main event and not lay down for Hogan. It's also been said that backstage, Andre didn't think too much of Hulk Hogan. Vince McMahon said, Hogan was really concerned that Andre wasn't going to put him over, and Andre didn't want Hogan to know. Terry had so much respect for Andre that he wouldn't just go up to Andre and ask, "Are you going to put me over?" He wouldn't do that because that would be disrespectful. So there was always this doubt. Hogan would come up to me and ask if I was sure Andre would put him over. It was said on the Andre the Giant HBO documentary that Hogan laid out the entirety of the match, move for move, but he left the finish open because he didn't know if Andre would indeed do the job for him. He wrote down the entire match without the finish and presented the notes to Vince McMahon. Vince took the notes to Andre, and on March 29th at WrestleMania, Hogan asked Vince what the finish was going to be. Vince, playing along with Andre here while making Hogan stress out, simply told Hulk that Andre would do the right thing, and he left it at that. Hulk would try to approach Andre backstage as Andre drank his wine, asking if he was good and if he was okay, and Andre would act quite dismissive towards Hulk in the hours, even minutes, leading up to the biggest WWF showdown of all time. The Hulkster noticed though, as soon as the two began wrestling in the ring, that Andre was going through the exact steps that Hulk wrote down and presented to Vince McMahon, reassuring him here that Andre was indeed going to do the job for Hulk. Now, with all that said, and to kind of burst the bubble on this story, it's also been said that this was all fabricated. Guys who were in the locker room at the time said it was all nonsense, there was no hate with Hogan and Andre, and things were quite jovial between the two backstage at WrestleMania. Now, again, to be fair, Bret Hart was one of the guys who said the whole Hogan versus Andre backstage fiasco was fabricated, so take from that what you will, we know how Bret can be sometimes. Who knows, it makes a great story and adds to an already iconic and legendary wrestling match, but I do find it strange that the whole Andre might not do the job story only really came to light over the past couple of years. You'd think that this would be a big story, considering how important the match had become. So our last Hulk Hogan video left off at WrestleMania 3. Hogan had just defeated Andre the Giant in one of the WWF's most historic matches. Hulkamania was running wild, the WWF was seeing a huge surge in popularity, and WrestleMania 3 itself had been a huge box office draw. The next steps in Hogan's career was all about latching onto that WrestleMania 3 success. Hogan and Andre would meet more times in the ring as the WWF tried to capitalise on their biggest drawing wrestling show to date. It just made a lot of sense to move forward with more twists and turns to the Andre vs Hulk rivalry. Today's video then will take a look at how the WWF and Hulk Hogan followed up with the success of Mania 3. We will take a look at Hulk's key matches from WrestleMania 3 in 1987 all the way to WrestleMania 4 in 1988. Today's video then will end at WrestleMania 4, making way for that dedicated Mega Powers video in the future that has been requested frequently on this channel. To tell the complete Hogan story though, this time period between Mania 3 and Mania 4 needs to be highlighted. There was some interesting stuff going on here, including a huge title change, and we also need to gain an understanding in regards to the Mega Powers' biggest enemies, the Mega Bucks. Immediately following WrestleMania 3, Hogan didn't go into another storyline or feud. On the big TV shows, the Heenan family versus Hogan rivalry would continue, but at live events, Hogan was having matches with the likes of Randy Savage, Kamala, the Honky Tonk Man, and King Harley Race. We're going to jump straight over then to the first ever WWF Survivor Series event, taking place on Thanksgiving night in 1987. Survivor Series was added to the WWF's pay-per-view calendar to piggyback off the success of WrestleMania III. The world wanted to see more Hogan versus Andre, and Vince McMahon would deliver. Vince got a little cutthroat here though with the Survivor Series. The event would go head to head with NWA's Starrcade 87, and if cable companies decided to air Starrcade instead of Survivor Series, well, those same cable companies would not be allowed to broadcast WrestleMania 4. Most cable providers gave in to Vince McMahon here. Only a few aired the NWA's Starrcade event, which was headlined by Dusty Rhodes taking on Lex Luger and Ric Flair taking on Ron Garvin. The main event of the first Survivor Series was a traditional Survivor Series elimination match. The heel team of Butch Reed, the one-man gang, Rick Rude, King Kong Bundy and Andre the Giant squared off against Bam Bam Bigelow, Don Morocco, Ken Patera, Paul Orndorff and Hulk Hogan. Watching this match back today is actually a whole lot of fun. It had a high amount of drama mixed with good in-ring action. In a surprising twist, Hulk Hogan ended up getting counted out during the main event match, leaving partner Bam Bam Bigelow to take on King Kong Bundy, the one-man gang and Andre the Giant all on his own. Bam Bam eliminated Bundy and gang, but Andre ended up pinning Bigelow and scoring the win for his team. This main event though was a real standout match for Bam Bam Bigelow, and the WWF had an opportunity here to capitalise on the excellent fan reaction the Beast from the East got during the inaugural Survivor Series, but they never did go all the way with Bam Bam Bigelow. Hogan returned to the ring and attacked Andre the Giant, and their feud would now resume. Immediately following the Survivor Series show, we had an episode of Saturday Night's Main Event where Hulk Hogan would defend the WWF Championship against King Kong Bundy. Before the match got underway, Andre the Giant came to ringside to get a better look at the action. Also, I can't go on here without pointing this out. Hogan's bandana had somehow grown tassels. God knows what he was thinking here, but anyway, on with the match. Bundy and Hogan had quite a good bout here. Hogan deviated from his usual heroic comeback match, and instead, both men got a fair amount of offense in. There was a great atmosphere in the arena too, and Andre being at ringside added a little intrigue here. Andre tripped Hogan up when the Hulkster went for the big leg drop, and I love how casually Andre grabbed Hogan's foot here. And because of Andre's actions, he was sent back to the locker room. The Hogan vs Bundy match resumed after a commercial break, and Bundy ended up getting the win after Hulk Hogan was again counted out, this time thanks to Bobby Heenan. After the match, King Kong Bundy demanded a rematch against Hogan, only this time he wanted Andre in his corner throughout the entire match. Hulk agreed to the rematch, saying he actually hopes Andre is in King Kong Bundy's corner, as the Hulkster will have all his Hulkamaniacs standing in his corner. The Bundy vs Hogan WWF Championship rematch would air on the 2nd of January 1988, again on Saturday Night's Main Event. Andre the Giant was once again in King Kong Bundy's corner, meaning the Hulkster would have his hands full here. This match played out more like a standard Hulk Hogan bout, with Hulk starting off strong, then taking a beating in the middle of the match, and the finale would see the superhero comeback that we were all used to seeing. This time though, during the comeback, the referee got knocked out. Referee Dave Hebner came down to the ring trying to get some assistance for his fallen compadre, and so the match was stopped. When we came back from commercial break, the match commenced with a new referee. High drama here on Saturday Night's Main Event for sure. Hogan looked like he was down and out, but the regular comeback eventually came and the audience went nuts when Hogan won the match. Hogan began posing to the audience as usual, but Andre got in the ring. The Giant grabbed Hogan and proceeded to choke him out in the middle of the squared circle. Multiple superstars came to the ring to try and save Hogan. Hacksaw Jim Duggan distracted Andre long enough for the other superstars to get Hogan out of the ring, and when everybody was gone, the Giant stood tall, holding Hogan's WWF Championship. After the match, Bobby Heenan and Andre the Giant had an entertaining interview with Gene Okerlund, and Heenan promised that Andre the Giant would be WWF Champion in 1988. Ted DiBiase had worked in the WWF in 1979, but he found a huge amount of success when he returned in 1987 as the $1 Million Man. The $1 Million Man believed that everyone had a price, including Hulk Hogan, and instead of winning the WWF Championship in a more traditional sense by, defeating the champion, Ted DiBiase decided that he would attempt to buy the WWF Championship from Hulk Hogan. Hogan, being the do-gooder and stand-up guy that he is, refused to accept DiBiase's money, and the two would have a series of matches that mainly unfolded on the house show loop, while Hogan's rivalry with the Heenan family unfolded on TV. DiBiase's attempts at buying the WWF Championship did make it to TV though, so before we get to the Royal Rumble, we need to take a look at the January 12th episode of Primetime Wrestling. Ted DiBiase had an interview segment where he said Hulk Hogan was a fool for not accepting a cash offer for the WWF Championship. Seeing as DiBiase was unable to buy the title then, DiBiase bought the next best thing. The $1 Million Man bought the wrestler who was going to face Hogan for the championship, Andre the Giant. DiBiase said that when Andre wins the gold, the Giant would hand the title to the $1 Million Man, and Ted DiBiase would finally be the WWF Champion without even defeating the current reigning title holder. At the 1988 Royal Rumble then, a contract signing took place for the upcoming Hulk Hogan vs Andre title match that would take place on the very first WWF The Main Event show. The Main Event was a Saturday night's Main Event spin-off show that aired on NBC, and the very first episode would host a colossal WWF Championship encounter, the WrestleMania III rematch pitting Hogan versus Andre. DiBiase stood in Andre's corner. Remember, if Andre defeated Hogan, then the Giant would hand the title over to the $1 Million Man. The match got signed, and Andre slammed Hogan's head on the table that was set up before tossing Hogan and the table to the other side of the ring. Hogan vs Andre at the Main Event then, February 5th, 1988. The unthinkable truly happened here when Hulk Hogan's 4-year title run came to a screeching halt in front of a staggering 33 million viewers at home. Championship belt fans will notice that this show also featured the debut of the Winged Eagle WWF Championship, my personal favourite WWE Championship belt of all time. Commentator Jesse Ventura made sure to mention that he's happy that Dave Hebner was refereeing this match, as there had been some controversy regarding WrestleMania III referee Joey Morella. Jesse believed that Joey should have counted to 3 when Andre fell on top of Hogan at WrestleMania III, but anyway, here we go. Hogan took care of DiBiase and Virgil before focusing on Andre, and man, you can tell Andre wasn't the same competitor here as he was at even WrestleMania. His health was of course deteriorating at a more rapid rate here. He did look very tired at points, but nonetheless, the two still managed to have an entertaining match. The finish though was expertly done. Dave Hebner was getting easily distracted by Virgil and DiBiase, allowing Andre to get in cheap shots behind the referee's back. Hebner even missed Hogan's leg drop and a pinfall attempt, which would have obviously led to a Hulk Hogan victory, so it's at this point of the match where people maybe had a bad feeling here. Things weren't working in the Hulkster's favour. Andre then hit Hogan with his double underhook suplex. Andre pinned Hogan. Hogan got his shoulder up after a 1 count, but the referee continued to count. 1, 2, 3, and the match was over. Andre the Giant had just defeated Hulk Hogan for the WWF Championship, and it seemed like Dave Hebner had screwed the Hulkster. Andre went ahead and put the belt around Ted DiBiase's waist after the match, and Hulk was left in the ring, no longer the World Wrestling Federation champion. Just then, another referee appeared in the ring, another referee who looked exactly like Dave Hebner. Jesse Ventura on commentary couldn't understand how there could be 2 Dave Hebners, but of course it turned out that Dave's twin brother Earl Hebner was the one who just refereed this match. The 2 Hebners argued in the ring, leading to Hogan grabbing both referees. The Hulkster wanted some justice here, but he didn't know which Hebner was which. Hulk's head then melted in the middle of the ring. You can see the exact moment where he was like, what on earth is going on here? Evil referee Earl Hebner kicked his twin brother out of the ring, leading to Hulk grabbing Earl, throwing him out of the ring and also totally missing his target. Poor Earl went flying over Ted DiBiase's head here. And so it was all over. Ted DiBiase had paid Earl Hebner to count Hogan's shoulders to the mat. Well, if you want to get totally kayfabed with it, Ted DiBiase had paid someone to have plastic surgery to look like Dave Hebner, but they switched that angle and went with the evil twin thing a few weeks later. Anyway, Hulk wasn't the champion anymore, and we were provided with one of wrestling's most entertaining finishes here of the late 80s. WWF President Jack Tunney said he watched the videotapes and unfortunately, a WWF referee's decision is always final, so Hulk Hogan was not the WWF champion. However, Andre the Giant is not allowed to just surrender his WWF championship to someone else, meaning that Ted DiBiase was not the WWF champion, nor was Andre the Giant, seeing as he had technically forfeited the title at the main event on February 5th. The title was vacated then, and a championship tournament would be held at WrestleMania IV. Hogan and Andre would face each other, and they got a bye into the quarterfinals, seeing as they were technically the last two champions, not including DiBiase, of course. At WrestleMania IV then, in Atlantic City, Hogan and Andre would meet in the ring once again. The finish would turn out to be quite anticlimactic and also quite stupid. Hogan hit Andre with a steel chair that Ted DiBiase introduced to the match. The referee saw it, so you'd naturally assume that Andre wins via disqualification and he continues on in the tournament. But no. After Hogan hit Andre with the chair, the Giant took the chair himself and hit Hogan in retaliation, so the match ended in a double DQ. Normal rules clearly don't apply to the Hulkster here, but anyway, Hogan body slammed Andre after the match. The body slam isn't remembered as much as the previous year's WrestleMania, but still it was a nice callback here. And in the tournament finals, Randy Savage went on to defeat Ted DiBiase. The Macho Man was the new babyface world champion of the World Wrestling Federation, but keep in mind that Hogan had helped Macho Man even the odds during the finals, as Andre the Giant had been interfering on DiBiase's behalf during the matchup. Along with this, Hulk Hogan jumped into the ring and hit DiBiase with a steel chair while the referee's back was turned. Yes, I know Hulk was getting revenge here for DiBiase introducing the steel chair during Hogan's match with Andre, but jumping into a ring and swinging a chair behind the referee's back is such a heel move that it's surprising the WWF booked the match to end this way. Thanks to the chair shot, Savage was able to hit the elbow drop and secure the title, so it also gives the impression that Randy Savage needed Hulk Hogan to win the WWF Championship. This should have been Randy Savage's crowning moment, the Macho Man's pay-per-view, the one night we all point to as the greatest night in Savage's career, and it's funny how we just don't seem to do that. But on the flip side of this, and in the spirit of being fair, Hogan's involvement in the WrestleMania IV main event speaks highly of how much the company relied on him. Even if we agree or disagree with how Hogan was used at WrestleMania IV, the WWF and Vince McMahon felt that Hogan sharing the ring with Savage to end WrestleMania would be the best way to end the show, a surefire way to send fans home with a smile on their face. Hindsight is 20/20 with these kind of things though. We all know that Randy Savage was more than capable of holding an audience in the palm of his hands all by himself. We all know Savage beating DiBiase clean would have been much better in terms of the story of Randy Savage, but the WWF done nothing but bank on Hulk Hogan's insane popularity at the time, and to give the WWF credit, it always worked. Something I'd also like to point out is that WrestleMania IV's promotional work was primarily focused around Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant. This seems to be forgotten these days, but posters, flyers, closed circuit and pay-per-view advertisements all focused around Andre versus Hulk, and I feel that fans who maybe bought the pay-per-view just for that match may have felt slightly cheated, but you have to remember also that Andre the Giant's health was still getting worse. What's done is done. Without Hulk Hogan dropping the title, we wouldn't have had Randy Savage getting his time in the limelight, so all's well that ends well, I guess, at least for the time being. With the introduction of Randy Savage here to the Hulk Hogan story, we need to rewind and go back to October 3rd, 1987, Saturday night's main event. Randy Savage took on the Honky Tonk Man for the IC title. Randy had his signature elbow drop and it looked like he was about to become the new Intercontinental Champion, but the Hart Foundation stormed the ring, ending the match by laying a beating into Randy Savage. The Honky Tonk Man was about to hit Savage with his guitar, and this led to Miss Elizabeth getting into the ring, attempting to protect the Macho Man. The Honky Tonk Man though was having none of it. He pushed Elizabeth down to the mat, and she ran away to the backstage area while Randy ended up taking the guitar shot anyway. Just as it seemed all hope was gone, Elizabeth returned to the ring with Hulk Hogan, and the Hulkster got into the ring to help fend off the Honky Tonk Man and the Hart Foundation. Randy Savage extended his hand in friendship to Hogan. Hogan accepted, and the three babyfaces paraded around the ring as the fans roared in approval. The madness and the mania had just come together in the middle of the squared circle. This night also pretty much cemented Randy Savage as a babyface. He had been on a slow turn, but this act of friendship with Hulk Hogan made him completely accepted by fans. Later that evening, during an interview segment with Gene Okerlund, Savage referred to himself and Hogan as the Mega Powers. Hogan and Savage would then team up at live events and house shows while continuing their respective solo feuds on TV, but this will all be covered in detail in the next Hogan video. Our last Hulk Hogan video on the channel looked at Hulk's journey from WrestleMania III to WrestleMania IV. Hogan had lost the WWF Championship to Andre the Giant at the very first WWF main event show, leading to Andre presenting the title to Ted DiBiase as the $1 Million Man had bought Andre's services. The WWF title was vacated and a tournament was held to crown a new champion at WrestleMania IV, and after the event, Hulk Hogan was no longer at the top of the mountain. Macho Man Randy Savage won his very first WWF title when he defeated Ted DiBiase in the tournament finals, bringing in what should have been a new era for the WWF Championship. While Randy Savage was very deserving of the title and fans across the world celebrated when Randy lifted both the WWF title and Miss Elizabeth in the air to end WrestleMania IV, the plan here all along was to actually build a new opponent for Hulk Hogan. The WWF would craft a story about friendship, jealousy and betrayal, a story that is still fondly remembered today and a story that we will cover from top to bottom in today's video. So let's go back in time and look at the madness meeting the mania, the rise of one of WWF's most star-studded tag teams, and the eventual fallout between the Macho Man Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan when the Mega Powers would explode. A brief recap of the last Hogan video is necessary here to gain a complete picture of the Mega Powers story. Saturday night's main event, October 3rd, 1987, Macho Man Randy Savage versus the Honky Tonk Man. You need to understand that Randy Savage had been booked as a heel up to this point, though a slow babyface turn was in the works. The Macho Man, even as a bad guy, was getting cheers from wrestling audiences. Fans had an underlying respect for Randy Savage. He kind of transcended what the WWF wanted him to be through his entertaining promos and his matches inside the ring. So the decision was ultimately made to turn the guy into a complete babyface and capitalise on the audience's reactions he and Miss Elizabeth had been receiving. So at this Saturday night's main event show, when the Honky Tonk Man and the Hart Foundation were about to lay a beating into Savage after pushing Miss Elizabeth down to the mat, Savage's valet went backstage to seek help from the immortal Hulk Hogan. Hogan came to the ring, he helped the Macho Man, the two shook hands in dramatic fashion, and Randy Savage's babyface turn was complete. The two men were interviewed after the match, and Randy Savage called the duo the Mega Powers for the very first time. It was an extremely fitting name. Savage had been a standout Intercontinental Champion, and Hogan was Hogan, the biggest star in the World Wrestling Federation. So you really did have a mega powerful force to contend with here, and in the 80s, young WWF fans just couldn't get enough of this pairing of two of their most beloved superstars. Little did we all know that the formation of the Mega Powers was going to lead to an eventual big money match between our two heroes, but two things to take away here. Firstly, it was really Miss Elizabeth who brought the Mega Powers together, she was the catalyst, and secondly, man, our TV screens struggled to handle such star power when Hogan and Savage were together cutting promos. It was on another level. Right, let's do some digging. The very first match we have for the Mega Powers was in Vancouver, a house show in November of 1987. The Mega Powers team up with Jim Duggan to take on King Harley Race, Rick Rude and King Kong Bundy. A big match for sure, but to my knowledge there doesn't seem to be any recordings of this bout available, at least online today. The next time the Mega Powers would team up was in January of 1988. The Mega Powers versus the Honky Tonk Man and the Hart Foundation in a 3-on-2 match, and again, it seems like this match too hasn't been recorded, and if it has, it hasn't seen the light of day. Hogan and Savage also teamed with Ricky Steamboat to take on the Honky Tonk Man and the Hart Foundation in Montreal on February 8th, 1988, but you guessed it, no recordings have been made available. These three matches, legitimately, are the only three matches the Mega Powers had together before WrestleMania IV. As a matter of fact, the Mega Powers only teamed up a grand total of 8 times during this era of the WWF, which is incredible when you think about it. The WWF were able to tell a story of a tag team exploding when, in reality, the tag team didn't really team up all that often, especially on TV. When it came to television and pay-per-view matches, the Mega Powers worked together only 3 times: SummerSlam 88, Survivor Series 88, and the second main event show. The Mega Powers actually teamed up way more frequently in World Championship Wrestling, but what the WWF creative team were trying to do here was prop up Randy Savage. When he got the rub from Hulk Hogan, there would be no stopping the macho madness in his quest to become the WWF champion. Hulk Hogan would still be around, of course, while Savage was on top. Hogan wasn't going to just sit around all day watching movies and playing his Game Boy.
Look at that, brother. Get to pick your own stage, get to call your own shots, man. A lot of political booking, dude. I like it already, brother.
No, Hulk may have had a few external projects to work on, such as the No Holds Barred movie, but when the time was right, Macho Man's position as a fan favourite would be tested when he came face to face with Hulk Hogan himself. The whole Mega Powers angle would ultimately lead to another opponent for Hogan to face, but to be fair, this is really how superstars should be made. Someone gets brought to the next level thanks to their association with a top guy, the two have a match, and in theory the WWF should be left with another main eventer on their hands. Don't get me wrong either, Randy Savage was already more than capable of being the man. He didn't necessarily need Hulk Hogan, but Hogan's extremely prominent position on the WWF cards did lend itself to Savage's rise within the World Wrestling Federation. It was like the cherry on top. It's easy to forget that Randy Savage actually wrestled Ted DiBiase on TV just 2 weeks before their WrestleMania IV main event. DiBiase vs Savage happened on the March 12, 1988 episode of Saturday Night's Main Event, and after Randy Savage lost via countout caused by Andre the Giant's interference, DiBiase, Virgil and Andre led a beating into Savage. Just like before, Miss Elizabeth ran to the back and she found Hulk Hogan. Hogan saved Savage once again from a 3-on-1 beatdown, so yeah, Hulk was kinda positioned as Randy Savage's saviour for a little while, kinda proving here that it was still all about the Hulkster. Anyway, WrestleMania IV happened. Savage wins the WWF Championship with the help of Hulk Hogan. Hogan sticks around for the celebration at the end, which many fans see as Hogan stealing the limelight, and maybe rightfully so. Randy Savage may have been the champion, but from WrestleMania IV onwards, the company was still seemingly all based around Hogan. This, of course, is nothing new in modern wrestling. There's a consistent trend of the WWE's champions not being the number one guys in the company, but still, back during this time period, the guy who holds the title should have been seen as the face of the company, in my opinion anyway. Savage realised that it was still all about Hulk, and slowly, there was a little animosity building between Savage and Hogan backstage. The two men were reportedly still friendly with each other, but they certainly weren't best buds who hung around together. And then there was Miss Elizabeth, Randy Savage's wife at the time. It's been well documented that Randy Savage was overly protective of Elizabeth. He would keep her away from the boys in the locker room, and Hulk Hogan was no exception. Most of the stories we hear about Randy Savage backstage during this time period somehow always involved Elizabeth, and a story Hulk Hogan shared on the Stone Cold podcast really goes a long way in highlighting how protective the Macho Man could be. When the Mega Powers were in full swing, Miss Elizabeth would also escort Hulk Hogan to the ring for singles matches, acting as a manager to both Savage and the Hulkster. And when Hulk grabbed Elizabeth to bring her into the ring during a house show in Paris, well, Randy Savage got so mad that both he and Hulk got physical backstage. There were apparently no ring steps set up beside the ring, so Hogan had to grab Elizabeth to put her inside the squared circle, and the Macho Man thought that Hogan had copped a feel when he lifted Miss Elizabeth. The two men had a scuffle backstage, but Hulk was eventually able to calm Savage down. Keep this all in mind though, the Mega Powers feud was centred around Miss Elizabeth and Randy Savage's jealousy, art imitating life. At SummerSlam 1988, the inaugural SummerSlam pay-per-view, the Mega Powers took on the Mega Bucks, Ted DiBiase and Andre the Giant. In the eyes of young fans, this was the ultimate battle between good and evil, and the Mega Powers would provide a feel-good moment for fans around the world when they toppled the Mega Bucks in the main event. The secret weapon of the Mega Powers, Miss Elizabeth, helped turn things around for Savage and Hogan when she revealed a little skin, distracting the villains long enough for Savage and Hogan to make an attack and end the match with a victory. The seeds though were already beginning to get planted for the eventual Hogan vs Savage match at WrestleMania. Savage didn't look too happy with Hogan celebrating so much with Miss Elizabeth. It was all very subtle at this point, but it was still done extremely well. You could tell that the Macho Man wasn't very keen on the Hulkster getting close to Elizabeth. The 1988 Survivor Series was next. The Mega Powers captained a Survivor Series team that also featured Hercules, Coco Beware and Hillbilly Jim, and they took on Akeem, the Big Boss Man, the Red Rooster, Haku and Ted DiBiase. If you want some further proof that the WWF was still centred around Hogan at this time, look no further than the 1988 Survivor Series entrances. Savage and Hogan were co-captains of their team, yet Hulk Hogan had his own separate entrance, while his teammates, including the WWF champion Randy Savage, all came out together. The babyfaces won the match, but afterwards Hogan once again got very friendly with Miss Elizabeth, and Savage's reaction wasn't so subtle this time. Hogan acted oblivious, but Randy was clearly pissed off. This was good stuff here, a nice slow build, a potential rivalry between two fan favourites. The eventual Savage vs Hogan match would have money written all over it. On the January 7th edition of Saturday Night's Main Event, airing a week before the 1989 Royal Rumble, Hulk Hogan took on Akeem. During this match, the Big Boss Man and Slick would constantly interfere, leading to Miss Elizabeth running backstage to get Randy Savage for help. Randy, however, decided not to help Hogan, insisting that Hulk was fine on his own and he didn't need any assistance during the match. Eventually, the numbers game was too much for the Hulkster, and after giving Hogan a beating, the heel trio turned their attention to Miss Elizabeth. When the Bossman tried to place handcuffs on Elizabeth, Savage ran to the ring to make the save, so it seemed like the Macho Man was in no rush to help Hogan, but he would still protect Elizabeth. In the Royal Rumble match the following week, Hogan eliminated Randy Savage by accident when the Hulkster tried to eliminate Bad News Brown. This, of course, would be another annoyance to the Macho Man Randy Savage. He didn't initially believe that Hogan's actions were accidental at all, but Miss Elizabeth was there to ensure cooler heads prevailed. It didn't last long though. The official split of the Mega Powers happened on the main event, February 3rd, 1989. Hogan and Savage were scheduled to take on Akeem and the Big Boss Man. During the bout, Akeem threw Savage out of the ring, but Savage fell onto Elizabeth, knocking her out cold. Hogan saw what happened, he rushed out of the ring to check the damage, but the Hulkster was definitely more concerned with Elizabeth here. Hogan picked up Miss Elizabeth as Randy Savage looked on in disbelief, and he brought her to the back for medical attention. Savage was left to take on Akeem and the Big Boss Man. A little later on, Hogan returned to the ring and he called for a tag into the match, but Savage slapped Hogan in the face before walking away, leaving Hogan to take on Bossman and Akeem. After Hogan won the match, he went to the back to check on Miss Elizabeth, and Randy Savage just had enough. He attacked Hogan in the first aid room as Elizabeth looked on. Before the attack, Savage said he was not the third wheel in the Mega Powers. He was the WWF champion, so he was number one. Savage said Hogan was jealous because the Macho Man was the champion, and Savage also said that Hogan had lust in his eyes for Miss Elizabeth. When talking about this part of the angle, Hulk Hogan said, It was all a play on real life, and it worked so well because Randy was the ultimate protector in real life. To take that into the WWE and turn it into entertainment, it was so perfect because it was real. Vince McMahon said, "In reality, Randy was so incredibly jealous of anyone that would even say hello to Elizabeth. Dealing with that was not an easy thing to do, but in regards to the WWE, there was a real story here. A natural, real-life story that would be easy to do because of the reality of the situation." And so it was time to cash in on the storyline. WrestleMania 5 would see the mega powers explode when Randy Savage defended his WWF Championship against Hulk Hogan in the main event. Fans wondered which side Elizabeth would be on. Would she stick with the Macho Man or would she jump over to join forces with Hogan? The March 11th episode of Saturday Night's Main Event would give us the answer. Elizabeth declared that she would remain neutral. She would not stand in either man's corner, something that further annoyed the Macho Man. Anyway, WrestleMania 5 was again held in Atlantic City. The show was billed as WrestleMania 5, The Mega Powers Explode. The world had watched Savage and Hogan's story unfold for over a year. It's now time to put on a show. The WWF had crafted an excellent story here, one that ran deeper than the Andre vs Hogan angle from WrestleMania III, so the pressure was on to deliver a memorable match. Miss Elizabeth ended up getting ejected from ringside. She tried to assist both men at different points during the match, and the referee made the decision to send her to the back. Savage and Hogan were then able to have a fair one-on-one match. The audience made a lot of noise during the bout, but we simply can't overlook the predictability of the match outcome either. Hogan, of course, got the win, and I feel that the predictable outcome maybe hurt the WrestleMania 5 main event at the time. The WWF were smart enough to play off this predictability at WrestleMania 6, but you did always feel that Hogan was going to emerge victorious when the Mega Powers exploded at WrestleMania 5. Still, it was a good match here, probably the best on the card in terms of storytelling and crowd anticipation. 1 year prior, in the exact same arena, Hulk Hogan had helped Randy Savage capture the WWF Championship, and a year later, after their relationship had many ups and downs, Hulk Hogan reclaimed the title when he delivered the leg drop to his former storyline best friend. So did we now have a new main event superstar in Randy Savage? One who would be able to carry the company if Hulk Hogan decided to call it quits? Well, yes and no. Savage, in my opinion, was already capable of carrying the workload should Hogan be absent, but the WWF decided to keep Savage heel. He wasn't going to be the huge babyface that the company had built up over the past year or so. Instead, Randy would leave Miss Elizabeth while siding with sensational Sherry, and the Macho King gimmick was born when Savage defeated Jim Duggan for the King of the Ring title in September of 1989. Savage also aligned himself with Zeus in the run-up to the No Holds Barred movie getting its cinematic release, leading to a tag team match at SummerSlam 89 where Zeus and Savage took on Brutus Beefcake and Hulk Hogan, and again, the two teams squared off at the No Holds Barred pay-per-view in a steel cage match. Savage and Hogan also had a rematch on the February 23rd, 1990 edition of the main event, and Hogan again got the victory. In the end though, Savage did eventually turn back into a good guy, and Miss Elizabeth was used once again to sway the fans' opinion of the Macho Man. After Savage turned babyface, the Mega Powers would team up 3 more times. The Mega Powers took on Jake the Snake Roberts and the Berserker on the February 1st, 1992 edition of Superstars. This was a dark match, but it was included in the unreleased Randy Savage DVD collection, and it's also available right now on YouTube. Savage and Hogan also defeated Jake Roberts and The Undertaker on February 10th, 1992 at a house show, and the last time the Mega Powers teamed up during this era of the WWF was on March 29th, 1992. The Mega Powers defeated Ric Flair and Sid Justice at a house show here. Of course, Hogan and Savage would team up down the road in WCW, both as good guys and also as part of the NWO, and Savage and Hogan's rocky relationship was the catalyst for the breakaway NWO Wolfpack faction, but we'll get to all of that in future Hogan uploads. So what was next for Hulk Hogan after WrestleMania 5? Well, Savage vs Hogan was the headlining match for many house shows throughout 1989. The WWF milked the feud for all it's worth, and rightfully so. While the whole Mega Powers thing was going on though, there was another superstar that was making waves in the World Wrestling Federation. We've talked a lot about Savage and Hogan being the top two guys in the company during this time period, but a third guy was getting such huge ovations and fan support that he just couldn't be ignored. And this guy was coming after Hulk Hogan and the WWF Championship. Our next video in this Hulk Hogan series stops off at WrestleMania 6, the Ultimate Challenge. The WWF Champion Hulk Hogan faces the Intercontinental Champion, the Ultimate Warrior. I hope you enjoyed this look back at the Mega Powers, and hopefully you can see why the rivalry and angle is so fondly remembered by today's wrestling fans. The story itself was the key ingredient here. I'm not going to say Hogan vs Savage at WrestleMania 5 is one of my favourite matches, because it isn't. I feel both guys have had better matches, but I still have an appreciation for the story that was crafted here. The Mega Powers falling apart forced fans to choose a side. It made us question if Randy Savage was really the bad guy in all of this, at least to begin with, and so the WWF played with fans' emotions here to get people invested, and it worked a charm. Even though he was turned into a full-time heel after all was said and done, Savage still had marquee matches. He had earned a prominent spot on the cards while Hogan remained as popular as ever, so it all worked out in the end. But anyway, thanks again for watching, and I hope you join me next time when we look at Warrior vs Hogan at WrestleMania 6.
When it comes crashing down and it hurts inside, you gotta take a stand, it don't help to hide.
While WrestleMania 5 in Atlantic City had its own polarising element when it came to the men who main evented the show, nothing divided fans quite like Warrior vs Hogan at WrestleMania 6. The WWF decided to put its two top babyfaces against each other in a match billed as the Ultimate Challenge. Both the Intercontinental Championship and the WWF title would be up for grabs. It was truly a spectacle for the ages that tested the loyalty of die-hard WWF fans. Would supporters rally behind Hulk Hogan, the man who elevated the WWF to heights the company had never seen before, or would they get behind the Ultimate Warrior, an embodiment of a new generation who done nothing but excite fans with his intensity and outlandish character? The WWF's alpha competitor Hulk Hogan would also be put to the test. Had years and years of being the quintessential good guy finally made fans grow tired and bored? Was it time for Hulk Hogan to pass the torch and let someone else bask in the babyface limelight? Let's take a look as we continue our Hulk Hogan series. Our next stop is WrestleMania 6 in the Toronto Skydome, the Ultimate Challenge. WWF Champion Hulk Hogan versus Intercontinental Champion the Ultimate Warrior. Winner takes all. If I'm being totally honest here, Hogan and Warrior's paths didn't cross all that often in the run-up to WrestleMania 6. This was a departure from previous WrestleManias, as Hogan's main body of work throughout a calendar year would all lead to the WrestleMania main event. WrestleMania 6 was different. It seemed like the WWF were willing to forego a deep story, and instead, the company would bank on the insane popularity of both the Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan. Looking back, it was neither the right nor the wrong move. Hogan vs Warrior at WrestleMania 6 is absolutely fine the way it is, and it would be wrong to try and go back and rebook things, but at the same time, could you imagine if Warrior and Hogan were given a year-long story that culminated at WrestleMania? It would have been great for sure. Hogan though was busy doing a little promotional work for his No Holds Barred movie, and maybe the WWF wanted to get back to basics a little with WrestleMania 6. No deep angle needed. Let the men go out and let the fans tell the story. I wouldn't change a thing if I'm honest, but it's still interesting to think about how the WWF could have told a longer story here with the Ultimate Challenge. Still, what I'm getting at is that this video won't have the twists and turns that were found in the Mega Powers saga, so we'll need to take a look at both men's individual journeys towards the Toronto Skydome to gain a bigger picture. The Ultimate Warrior made his WWF debut in June of 1987, then known as the Dingo Warrior, and immediately the Warrior began destroying jobbers and lower mid-card talent. Real name Jim Hellwig, the Ultimate Warrior was booked as an unstoppable force in wrestling. He was well known for his high energy entrances, his colourful ring gear, and his face paint. His ability to absorb punishment from his opponents was something we had never seen before, turning matches around in his favour in practically no time at all. The man was a spectacle of the ring. There was a legit shift in atmosphere when Warrior's music played in the arena as fans got on their feet to cheer for this over-the-top, real-life superhero. Warrior's first big feud in the World Wrestling Federation was against Hercules Hernandez, leading to a match between the two men at WrestleMania IV. But when we talk about 1988, there was no bigger night for the Ultimate Warrior than SummerSlam. The Honky Tonk Man had set records with his 454-day Intercontinental title reign, but when the Ultimate Warrior was revealed as Honky Tonk Man's surprise opponent at SummerSlam, a real moment in wrestling took place when the Warrior won the IC title. During a memorable feud with Ravishing Rick Rude, Warrior dropped and regained the Intercontinental title while his crowd support continued to grow, and after the Warrior was booked to defeat Andre the Giant at numerous shows across the United States, Jim Hellwig was established as a main event player. Following the Andre the Giant feud, Ultimate Warrior's next stop was the 1990 Royal Rumble, and it was here when the Warrior would stand face to face with Hulk Hogan on pay-per-view for the very first time. After Hulk Hogan had defeated Randy Savage at WrestleMania V, it was business as usual for the real American. The Hogan vs Savage match was booked on live event after live event, the WWF capitalising here on their big drawing WrestleMania V main event by taking the match on the road. Before Mania 5, Hulk had filmed the WWF produced movie No Holds Barred, with Vince McMahon feeling that Hogan had the drawing ability to attract film goers of the late 80s. The movie reportedly broke even. No real profits were made here, but it wasn't through the WWF's lack of trying. In order to sell the movie as a pay-per-view spectacular, Tiny Lister, who played the villain Zeus in the No Holds Barred film, was brought into the WWF for a few matches and appearances. Today we can look back and shake our heads at how silly this may have been, but you have to remember that in the 80s, Hulk Hogan was legitimately one of television's biggest stars, a real household name that fans really couldn't get enough of. The movie seemed like a win-win situation, make more money from the Hulk Hogan name while attempting to break into Hollywood. What really could go wrong? Well, the movie itself was the problem. No Holds Barred was panned by critics, and while some said that Hogan had an appealing on-screen quality about him, the movie itself was a different story altogether. Nonetheless, the WWF would bring the evil Zeus to wrestling audiences whether they liked it or not. Brutus Beefcake and Hulk Hogan defeated Zeus and Randy Savage at SummerSlam 89, and in December, Hogan and Beefcake again defeated Savage and Zeus at the No Holds Barred pay-per-view event. The pay-per-view featured the entire movie before a steel cage tag team match, and it's one of a few pay-per-views that still isn't available on the WWE network. After Hogan got finished up with the No Holds Barred stuff, he too made his way to the 1990 Royal Rumble. Both Hogan and Warrior were in the Royal Rumble match itself. Warrior entered at number 21, Hogan entered at number 25. After eliminating some competitors from the match, both Hogan and Warrior were left in the ring alone. This was the moment where many fans began wanting something that they didn't know they wanted before. The penny dropped here. It was like, oh, Hogan and Warrior are alone in the ring. We weren't expecting this, but we also can't wait to see what happens next. Warrior and Hogan played it up perfectly too. The two men looked at each other before circling around the ring. The fans roared with anticipation as two of their heroes were about to collide in the squared circle. There would be no clear winner here. Warrior and Hogan took each other out with a double clothesline before the next competitor got in the ring. In the end, Hogan eliminated Warrior by accident, and the Hulkster went on to win the whole thing. What we got here was a taste of things to come, an appetizer for WrestleMania 6. Fans wanted to see what would happen if Hulk Hogan faced the Ultimate Warrior in a one-on-one matchup. The following week, on Saturday night's main event, Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior teamed up to take on The Genius and Mr. Perfect. Hogan and Warrior showed signs of unity in the pre-match interview with Gene Okerlund, and later in the ring, it seemed like both men were on the same page. Warrior and Hogan won the match, but afterwards, when the Genius and Perfect launched a post-match attack, the Warrior accidentally hit Hulk Hogan. After some pushing and shoving, the two men left the ring and the fans were left wondering if it was really going to happen. Would Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior meet in the middle of the ring? Well, fans wouldn't have to wait for long. Hulk Hogan was the man who put forward the ultimate challenge. He wanted to know which force was strongest in the World Wrestling Federation, Hulkamania or the power of the Warrior. Both belts would be put on the line, and the match was made official on February 10th, 1990, Hogan vs Warrior at WrestleMania 6. At the third main event show on February 23rd, 1990, Hulk Hogan was scheduled to defend his WWF title against the Macho King Randy Savage. James Buster Douglas would serve as the special guest ring enforcer here, and this is interesting because Mike Tyson was actually supposed to referee this match. Buster defied the odds and got a knockout win over Tyson just 2 weeks before the main event show here, so Buster was brought in and Tyson was left out. Tyson would eventually make his way to the World Wrestling Federation at WrestleMania 14, but anyway, it's very interesting here when you consider that Vince McMahon and Jesse Ventura had been hyping Tyson's appearance for a month or so, and then, just like that, Buster Douglas is in and Tyson is out. Anyway, Hogan wins the match when Buster makes the 3 count. A little later on, the Ultimate Warrior defended his IC title against Dino Bravo, and when Warrior got the pinfall win, Earthquake jumped into the ring to help Bravo with a post-match attack. Hulk Hogan ran to the ring to help the Warrior, but Warrior didn't seem too pleased with Hulk trying to help him out. The two men squared off once again. There was no punches thrown, however, and before the main event show ended, both men cut backstage promos. Hogan said he helped the Warrior because he wants his WrestleMania opponent to be at 100% when it was time for WrestleMania 6, and the Ultimate Warrior talked about how the Hulkamaniacs around the world are maybe doubting that their hero can leave WrestleMania with both the WWF Championship and the IC title. 2 weeks later on WWF Superstars, Warrior returned the favour when he saved Hulk Hogan from Earthquake. Warrior had a chance to clothesline Hogan, but he didn't do it. The two looked at each other before Warrior ran back to the gorilla position. And really, that was your build-up for WrestleMania 6. There was also a backstage contract signing that took place and a few pre-recorded promos that aired on television shows, but this was pretty much it. As mentioned earlier though, Warrior vs Hogan didn't need anything more. What you have to keep in mind is that Hogan had just had a series of landmark WrestleMania main events that helped solidify him as WrestleMania's star attraction. For another babyface to come in and challenge the status of Hogan at WrestleMania, it was quite unheard of, but this was all that was needed to tell the story. What brought the Ultimate Warrior to the dance, in my opinion, was his appeal to the young teenage audience of the World Wrestling Federation. The comic book character that had came to life. That kind of thing really captured the imagination of fans who maybe began their WWF fandom as little Hulkamaniacs, but these same fans had grown over the course of 5 years or so. The Ultimate Warrior came across as a bit more edgy and a bit more cool. Of course, Hulk Hogan still had his legions of supporters. Hogan was still the premier all-American good guy and hero, but the character of the Ultimate Warrior seemed to tap into the imagination of young fans in a much more visceral way. The Warrior was maybe seen as more modern and with the times than Hulk Hogan. In the back of many people's minds, this was going to be another Hulk Hogan victory. It's no wonder either. One look at Hogan's WrestleMania history lets us know that the odds were stacked against the Warrior here. The Ultimate Warrior was the underdog at WrestleMania 6 in a way. Not only that, but Hulk Hogan and WrestleMania were just in sync with each other back then. Both existed and flourished because of each other, so you always thought that, with the exception of WrestleMania 4, Hulk Hogan just couldn't be beat on the grand stage. Well, fast forward to April 1st, 1990, the Toronto Skydome, and the Warrior defeated Hogan to become the WWF champion while still retaining the Intercontinental Championship. It was surprising to say the least, but let's look at the match itself before continuing on. First off, the Toronto Skydome, now known as the Rogers Centre, looked absolutely amazing for WrestleMania 6. A good arena helps WrestleMania stand out for sure. You kind of associate the arena with the event in many ways, and WrestleMania 6 is no exception. I always think of the giant wide video board when I think of this WrestleMania. Also, the WWF's production values had gone through some insane improvements since WrestleMania 5. Compare these two shows yourself, the camera work, the overall broadcast quality, the audio for the theme music, everything is much more updated with WrestleMania 6, and it does make the show a little more pleasant to watch. Hogan and Warrior each had pre-match promos and both were memorable, but Warrior's was on a different level. You need to watch this a few times. Warrior did deliver his promos in a peculiar way, to say the least, but Warrior questioned Hogan's beliefs while saying he will bring the Hulkamaniacs and the Warriors together by winning the WWF Championship. It's an insane promo. I can't do it justice by talking about it, and neither can anyone else. Go watch it and feel the power of the Ultimate Warrior. Right, let's look at the match. Now, I don't care what anyone says here, watch it back for yourself. It's undeniable that Hogan gets a much stronger crowd reaction during the entrances and in the opening moments of the bout. We've already talked about how both men had their fair share of supporters, and I'm not saying that there weren't tens of thousands of fans who wanted the Warrior to win, but watch the entrances and you'll see it for yourself. Hogan gets the better crowd response initially. The pre-match stare down was phenomenal. Warrior looked so intense when he stood toe to toe with Hogan, creating a WrestleMania moment by just having both men look at each other. The beginning of the match then played into both men being fan favourites and both men not giving an inch. If Warrior pushed Hogan, Hogan pushed Warrior right back. If Hogan overpowered the Warrior, Warrior would proceed to overpower the Hulkster. The two men even went through this routine with a test of strength in the opening minutes of the match, and while this kind of thing would get mocked in today's wrestling, the fans totally ate it up here at WrestleMania 6. It was the absolute right booking decision here, have both men look like equals. Hogan fell to the outside and it looked like he had blown his knee out, giving the Warrior a little time to zone in on the injury, but within seconds, Hogan's knee had magically healed and the match played out as if nothing had happened. This was odd for sure. I think Hogan was trying to play possum. He did give Warrior a thumb to the eye afterwards, but it just didn't translate well on TV. Things started getting even more strange when Hulk Hogan began getting the upper hand in the match, something that normally never happened. Hogan's matches were all about the heroic comeback, so it's strange to see a Hulk Hogan match during this time period that had Hogan in the driver's seat for so long. You have to remember that the Warrior was not used to long main event matches though. Warrior was all about the entrance and the character. He would smash his opponents in no time at all, win the match and leave the ring. He was limited in the squared circle, and so was Hogan to be fair, but the Hulkster had the experience here. It made sense for Hogan to set the pace and be the aggressor. If you need proof, when Warrior got back on his feet to mount some offense, he performed clothesline after clothesline, running from one side of the ring to the other without much wrestling going on, to be honest. Now, I'm not trying to pick apart the Ultimate Warrior here. This was his ring style and it worked for him. It got fans on their feet and it made the people scream and shout, and that's really all you can ask for. However, I think Vince McMahon knew that a typical Ultimate Warrior match wouldn't quite cut it in the main event of WrestleMania, and so Hogan was able to take control of the match much more than his opponent. Warrior was able to get a bear hug on Hogan that lasted a very long time. The referee got wiped out after Hogan broke the bear hug, and Hogan pinned Warrior for the 1, 2, 3 while the ref was out cold. This was your Hogan insurance policy right here, folks. Hogan would have won the bout had the referee been there to make the count. The same thing happened moments later when Warrior pinned Hogan, but Hogan had Warrior beat first, of course. The audience went into overdrive when Hogan kicked out of the Gorilla Press Slam and the splash delivered by the Warrior. Hogan hulked up and went for the leg drop. Warrior moved out of the way, hitting another splash and scoring the pinfall win. But look at the pinfall here, and look at how Hogan still kicked out on 3. Again, another Hulk Hogan insurance policy. He beat me, but he didn't really beat me. I mentioned that Hogan got a better crowd reaction at the start of the match, but when Warrior got the 1, 2, 3, the audience was absolutely deafening. I feel like I've been a little harsh here, and I really don't mean to be. Previously I spoke about how Andre vs Hogan at Mania 3 gets a lot of flack for the in-ring wrestling, but I still feel that that match is really important and special, and that is how I also feel about Hogan vs Warrior. At WrestleMania 6, the main event competitors I felt did a great job of covering up both of their shortcomings, and they gave the absolute best match they could, given the circumstances. At the time, it worked. The Ultimate Challenge was everything fans could have hoped for, and even bigger than all of this was that we now had a new superstar at the very top of the mountain. Hulk Hogan had lost the WWF Championship to another babyface. At the time it was booked as a passing of the torch, and while we now have the luxury of 2020 hindsight and we all know that it wasn't really a passing of the torch, it was still a special moment in WWF history, and that is something I can really respect. Wrestling isn't always about the moves in the ring or the politics at play. It's also the emotions fans go through from bell to bell and how you feel when the match comes to an end. Hogan vs Warrior delivered on that front. It was a monumental moment in WWF lore, and for that reason, even though the action inside the ropes wasn't a technical showcase, Hogan vs Warrior is still a special must-see match. Wrestling audiences, in particular WWF audiences, were always used to having one guy they loved versus one guy they hated in the ring. It was cut and dry, cheer for the hero, boo the villain. This time though, fans had to choose. This, I feel, is another layer that helped make the WrestleMania 6 main event so special. It wouldn't be the last time a huge babyface squared off with another huge babyface, but WrestleMania 6 was the first time it was done on a giant pay-per-view stage, and it's this key element that makes Hogan vs Warrior still stand out to this very day. Anyway, Hogan celebrated with the Warrior afterwards, something that fans see as an example of Hogan holding onto the spotlight, but it's also really hard to imagine the end of WrestleMania 6 without Hogan celebrating with Warrior, giving young fans of the WWF a feel-good moment here to end the biggest show of the year. The Warrior would continue on as the WWF champion, although he did have to forfeit the IC title, as apparently any single superstar isn't allowed to hold two belts at the same time, so why was the match booked in the first place? But anyway, Hulk Hogan moved into a feud with the 468-pound Earthquake. After this, the Hulkster stood up for his country when he faced Sergeant Slaughter at WrestleMania 7, and boy, there's a big story to tell there, but this will all get covered in the next Hogan video uploaded to the channel. In the end, dropping the title to the Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 6 I felt was the right thing to do. Hogan did not lose any of his popularity throughout the remainder of 1990, and just a year later, he was back in the WrestleMania main event. Normal service would very much resume. You'd hope after WrestleMania 6 that Hogan would see the upside in losing, how he could tell stories through defeat and play on the emotions of his very own fans, but that didn't really happen. Again, we can talk about this a little more in the very next upload. Thanks very much for watching this video and sticking with me throughout this story of Hulk Hogan's entire career. With this video, we've passed through from the 80s and into the 90s. The 1990s would prove to be even more storied for Hulk Hogan than the decade prior. We have a lot more of Hulk Hogan's career to cover, and I hope you join me next time for WrestleMania 7.